The information shared on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While we discuss topics related to mental health, well-being, and emotional support, we are not providing therapy or medical services. Always seek the advice of your physician, psychologist, psychiatrist, or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. If you are in crisis, feeling unsafe, or need immediate support, please contact a mental health professional or emergency services in your area. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organizations or institutions.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A_Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, the podcast that I like to say looks at the idea of mental wellness. And I want us to embrace this as a salient topic, but I'm trying to approach it from a very fresh and forward-thinking perspective. So with that being said, if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome. Matter of fact, I like to say welcome to my listeners from Japan and Vietnam, and we've added Turkey and Russia. The global reach is growing, and I love the support. And of course, stateside, you guys are equally as supportive. California, Illinois, Texas, Washington, all over the place. Love the support. Keep it coming. It's a fantastic thing. But of course, if you're a first-time listener or viewer, I do like to say, buckle up for safety, because occasionally it might be an unexpected bumpy ride, only because maybe something is said that makes you go, Now, also, if you're a first-time listener or viewer, that means you may not exactly know how to connect with the show. That's okay. You can always find episodes of M.A.Y.A so many different places. You pick your podcast platform and there it is. So you can find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. If you name it, you can find it. Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And of course, an easy way would be just to subscribe to me and follow me on YouTube, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Those are easy ways also to connect with the show. But something else to consider, you can always take M.A.Y.A on the go. I definitely made this easy. Keep it in the palm of your hands, because there's an app, the M.A.Y.A Experience, which you can find in the Apple Store, Amazon, and by the way, now it is also available in Google Play. So you can just go there, you search the M.A.Y.A Experience, and voila, you download it, and it is free. So you get to take your mental wellness, reflection, and thoughts with you right there on the go in the palm of your hand. You can always scan these QR codes right there on the screen to go to the Apple Store and the Amazon Store as well. You just search, like I said, the M.A.Y.A Experience, and voila, you are tapped into the show, and you always know where we're going because you've taken me on the go. But if you are a returning listener or viewer, then you're going to kind of show people how we do things here. And it's pretty straightforward, to tell you the truth. We take this next 30 or 40 minutes, find that place that's relaxing for you, that space, so you can relax, reflect, and more importantly, here we're talking about reframing some of the things that you are struggling with. So grab your beverage of choice, and take a deep breath and get ready so we can do a deep dive into exploring the idea of what exactly emotional paralysis is. But more importantly, once you can identify it, if you happen to be struggling with it, then how do you actually address it? That's what we're going to dive into in this show. So quite a bit, and you might say, that was something that I didn't know I was actually doing. But here's what's more important. If you want to join the conversation, you can actively be engaged with me here. All you have to do is type a comment into YouTube or Facebook, and you post the comment. I'll check it out. And if it sounds like something we should share with everybody, boom, I can post it on the screen, and you are part of the show and the conversation. But with that being said, let's jump right into how to identify and address emotional paralysis. Okay, so let's really talk about this. We have all been told that the truth will set you free, right? But what people often do not tell you is that sometimes the truth can feel like a cage. Now think about that. The truth can feel confining, like you're locked into something. You may know exactly what you think, you may know exactly what you feel, and you may know exactly what you need to do in certain situations. But you're standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to move because you know the moment that you take that step, you make that really hard choice that you don't want to make, it's going to hurt. That's exactly what emotional paralysis is. And today we're going to talk about why you can get stuck in things like I call the emotional echo chamber. And if you don't know what that is, you don't often know how to get out of it. That's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about today when you're feeling stuck. Because love, if it doesn't serve you, it's a problem. And we have to learn how to move forward, even in our most difficult times. And that's what we're actually going to jump into today. So you're going to understand how to identify if you are struggling with emotional paralysis, and then how to address it. So we talked pretty much about what emotional paralysis is. It's when you don't know what to do, or you're struggling with what to do. Sometimes you do know what to do with how you think and how you feel, but you're struggling to pull that trigger, which means you are putting yourself in ongoing pain in a situation, whether it be a relationship or whether it be a job or whatever the case may be, because you are struggling to take the action based on the decision that you know is necessary to preserve your emotional and mental well-being. You are stuck in a state of paralysis. And that's key. And a lot of people do not understand that. So you may say, okay, so you told me pretty much what it is. Is there any specific way I can identify if I'm stuck in like a particular space? And I'm going to talk about this in two ways. You can have an emotional space where you are feeling stuck. And of course, there might be that separate mental space where you are feeling stuck. So when we talk about the emotional space with emotional paralysis, it's when you're reflecting on a person or a situation. Do you feel deep sadness? Do you often feel despair? Or in that situation, might you feel disregarded or even disappointed? Often just you're feeling like you're in this drift. If I'm describing how you're feeling when you're dealing with a situation, whether it be a family, a friendship, or a romantic engagement, or even your job, you are in an emotional space where you might be struggling with emotional paralysis in order to do things that you can do to make that space better for you. So that's one key thing I definitely want you to think about. So there's that emotional space. Well, let's talk about, well, what is that mental space? What does that look like? That's when you're struggling with your logic, when the feelings and fact are just not aligning. You cannot be objective because you can only see things from that subjective. You are the subject, the subjective point of view of something. You have no perspective. You're only living based on perception of something, and you are truly struggling with it, which often in many places, when you talk about that emotional space, you lack that balance because you cannot balance fact with feeling. That's where your emotional space is compromised. So we've talked about what it looks like to be in that emotional space and that mental space when all of a sudden paralysis might be beginning to set in. So what's the dilemma, you might ask yourself, in these situations? Well, the dilemmas often are very, very straightforward. You love yourself, or at least you have enough self-awareness in situations to know better. But at the same time, either that love or commitment you feel for the other person or the situation is the obstacle or the conflict that is causing the paralysis for you. So that's the dilemma that you sit in. You know something is not good for you, but you're struggling to choose you. And that can be a difficult dilemma to be in, especially realistically, if you have lived a life where you were taught that to put yourself first is selfish, then many people fall into the idea that if I do for me first, that's wrong. They don't know that there are times in your life when being selfish is a necessity in order to preserve your emotional and mental well-being and to not get stuck in this paralysis state where you're moving in ways that are not good for you and you're not happy, but yet you are so focused on preserving that for other people. That's when you know you are fully deep into emotional paralysis. So we talk about the dilemma. Well, the dilemma is straight out. We talked about what causes it. Well, I'm going to flat out say this. It gets to not being able to put yourself first or to be able to even identify when that is a necessity. So often when people have this feeling of connection, like due to maybe they have commonality with people, I often hear the word trauma bonding, which is not a healthy nor is it real thing, because you may share an experience with someone like a similar situation, but the experience itself is very unique. And often people will bond with people over things where the commonality does not run as deep as they often think that it is. So that's one piece. You think you've got something in common, so you're connecting with someone. A lot of times you've had good times with people. So when things go bad, you struggle to be able to let go because of the positive things that you remember. Often people are afraid of being alone because they don't know what that feels like to be alone. And they think that's an unexplored territory that they can't navigate, even without trying. Often people don't even trust themselves that they have the ability to be able to make sufficient choices for themselves. So they rely on others. And often others will not make those choices that are best for you. And then you can build into all of this that when you lack self awareness, self esteem, but more importantly, self love, you're stuck usually in an emotional echo chamber, which means a paralysis can be very real for you. Now, some people might say, echo chamber. I've heard that before. Well, what exactly does that mean? So, an echo chamber, in its traditional meaning, is often when you're in an environment or a space, like for instance, being online on the internet or even social media spaces, is where echo chambers can exist for people, where often someone is exposed or they only present themselves with opinions that align with them or information that maybe supports or mirrors their own. So often it tends to reinforce their beliefs and they often exclude opposing viewpoints. I'll tell you what's interesting about social media. It probably doesn't help you to not get stuck in an echo chamber because it really runs a lot on algorithms. So if you're clicking on certain things, it's often going to show you more of that than anything else, which means then you don't have any opposing views or different things to compare to be logical and objective in making decisions. Well, an emotional echo chamber is very much the same thing. You have ultimately locked yourself into the experiences of something. And you have come to believe that a relationship or a love with a person, that it's good because you're focusing on the connection and the love as an authentic experience and it's real, but it's often based on the beliefs from past experiences. When the emotions were forged in a happier time, or maybe you were young, or it was genuine in some way. But if a situation or a relationship has shifted and it no longer reflects those things, but you're holding on to it because you're holding on to the past, you are now stuck in an emotional echo chamber. Because what you're not doing is in reason and logic to say, this relationship has changed and not for the good. This is what's different. These are the pros. These are the cons. But wait, all of a sudden the cons greatly outweigh the pros. And I find I'm emotionally and mentally under duress, but you can't shake it and you can't let it go because you're stuck in your echo chamber of the past. And that's when you have to step back. And if you have nothing that can help you to learn to be objective, that echo chamber can trap you. And it could become the thing that felt freeing and it felt like it was a compass that directed you. It can start to feel like a cage because you can't escape the emotions and the experiences because you remember the good. And often that fear I talked about of maybe being alone or whatever, or you have lack self-awareness or self-love will keep you linked to something that is unhealthy for you. Okay, so we've talked about what emotional paralysis is. So the question might be, okay, I think I might have some situations where I'm definitely stuck in an emotional echo chamber that I need to break free of. But Maya, how do I do this? Because clearly, if I'm tied heavily to the emotions, I'm struggling with letting things go. So how do I do this? Okay, well, there's roughly 5 ways that we can talk about addressing the emotional paralysis that you might be in. And those 5 things include reframing the pain you're feeling, balancing fact and feeling, escaping that echo chamber, using love as a compass and not a cage. And lastly, doing this in small increments, because that's the way you have to approach these things. Remember, change is never really successful if you attempt to do it in big sweeping moments. A lot of people wonder why they're not successful at many things. One, they fail to plan. So hence, they fail. But the biggest thing is you should do things in small steps, and those small steps should build to whatever the bigger goal is. So once you've acknowledged you're in emotional paralysis, and you understand why and why not moving forward, then you have to say, okay, I need to reframe this pain. I got to look at reframing that pain. I got to balance fact with feeling. And that's the only way I'm going to get out of the past experiences that I keep allowing to dictate me moving forward. So let's start with talking first, flat out, about reframing the pain. And a lot of time, yes, it's about the idea of the silver lining. Sometimes you can tell yourself, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. So what do I do with it? What's the lesson? What's the takeaway? Yes, this was the negative, but what was something I can say that could teach me that moving forward, I won't make that mistake again? How can I reframe this mistake to not repeat it? Here becomes the reality check you got to give yourself when you talk about reframing the pain. A reality check is not about you avoiding the pain. In fact, you're acknowledging that it exists, but you're choosing to not move away from it. So instead of moving away from pain, you're allowing yourself to be in this slow cycle of lingering aches and pains over something that's a very sharp reality for you, opposed to choosing the pain that might hurt in the moment when you make the decision. But then the healing can begin. The thing I always tell people about healing, and if you don't understand this, this might be why you have always struggled with getting past something versus through it or around it, is that even healing starts with pain. You have to be able to acknowledge it. And in the healing process, you may actually have to experience something or acknowledge the pain several times in order to truly understand it, to be able to move past it. And for a lot of people, the idea that they have to revisit things that might be painful is the very reason they become avoidant. And thence they are emotionally paralyzed because they have that fear of the work that has to happen because the pain they don't want to experience. But what they fail to acknowledge is they're holding themselves in a pattern of pain because they're afraid to actually break it. So remember, healing is going to be some revisiting of pain, maybe more than once, maybe more than twice, 3 or 4 times. But in the end, you'll get to the destination you're attempting to seek. So remember, that reality check is about when you're reframing the pain, make sure you're being honest with yourself about that. Because right now, when you talk about reframing pain, it's telling yourself, I'm going to be action oriented, because choosing to not act is being inactive, and hence you're not reframing anything. It can hurt once or it can hurt forever. You get to make that choice on that. All right. So we talked about the first thing you have to do is reframe that pain to say it doesn't have to be long-term anymore. I can make this a short-term or I can end it. And that's how you reframe it. Then you talk into how do I do a balancing act with these things? Fact versus feeling. And this is something in a type of therapy modality called dialectical behavioral therapy, where we say your mind functions in 3 domains. The feeling mind, where you feel everything and you base your decisions on how you feel. Some people are more fact related. They look at the facts to try to balance out the feeling or close the feeling out. And they make their decisions. The facts say this. Where you really want to be is what we say, the wise mind. You acknowledge your feelings, but then you challenge those feelings with facts to make sure your feelings are truly grounded and they're valid. Because sometimes we can be 100 about something. And to be honest, when we step back, we realize, okay, I may have overestimated that, or I might have put too much into it. So be careful when you tell yourself you're being 100. Because when you say you're being 100, does that mean you are truly balancing out feeling with fact when you choose to act? And that becomes a key thing. So let's throw an exercise into the idea of I'm learning how to balance my fact with my feelings. So what that would look like and what you would tell yourself is that if you're struggling to process facts objectively, consider this. When you, let's say, love someone, we tend to treat potential and past experiences with current facts, and they're not. They're just that. They are past. So when you're trying to analyze a situation, I will tell you, you must look at what is currently happening, and that's what you have to base decisions on, not things just from the past. Because if you base it on past experiences, then you're going to struggle with being honest about what's happening right now. Because the situation may have shifted and moved in a direction that's no longer the direction that you want to go. But you have to be willing to acknowledge that. Are you basing the reason you can't move based on potential of something? It potentially could be that. And I always tell people, potential is a great and also a dangerous thing. Because I always ask people, with a situation or a person, If it never changes and it maintains what it is in its current state, will you be okay with that? If it never reaches the potential you believe it has. And if you can say, at face value, what's in front of me, I can accept this if it never changes, then you're being honest with yourself. But if you find yourself saying, well, I'm kind of in this because the potential is something that I'm waiting to happen. If it never happens, then you may be living with disappointment. And that's a key thing to remember about when you deal with potential. And then the other thing we talked about is past memories. Yes, they can be strong and they can be valued. And this is when I tell people, that's when you make your pros and cons list. The pros of this situation is this, the cons are that. And ask yourself, when you pro and con it, go even deeper and say, the pros I'm listing, these are from the past. And these are the current pros that balance out. And what does that look like? You want to see that the current pros look a lot better than the past if you're struggling with something. And the cons, you definitely want to feel like if you can list cons from the past and they can overweigh the cons of the present, that's something else to truly think about. So even making pros and cons, you got to do a deeper dive than just making the list. Are they based on what's currently happening or on the past? And only you can place the value onto that. And that's a key thing to remember. So that's a key exercise when you're trying to figure out how to do this balancing act. Do the pros and cons, but look at present versus the past. And that should help you to figure out, I am clearly paralyzed because I am struggling to move away from this. The next thing that we would look at that is so equally important for people to consider is escaping the echo chamber. This one is big because a lot of people really struggle with this because being in that echo chamber means this is the pace of familiarity. I am comfortable here. Often an echo chamber, it gives you those things that when people are complacent, they like being in that space because they have convenience, comfort, control, and consistency. And they often don't want to give those things up. But the most important thing that's often missing from that is connection. And when connection is missing, those four things won't mean a whole lot because you can go from being complacent when you ask connection to something to feeling content and happy where you are in the moment. And that's important. But a lot of people will discount what's presently happening to them and they want to cling to the past. So you ask yourself, well, M.A.Y.A, how can I escape the echo chamber? Well, you got to learn to broaden your perspective when it's all said and done. And what that means is if you find you are only surrounding yourself with things that make you comfortable and reinforce your way of thinking, your chances of getting out your echo chamber is going to be real rough because you, in order to often gain objectivity, you have to hear other perspectives to broaden yourself. Otherwise, you're looking at the world through only your lens and your perception of what's happening. But when you step outside of that and you get some other perspective, then you can say to yourself, okay, this echo chamber is no longer healthy because those past experiences do not mirror what's happening currently now. And I'm no longer happy. I am unhappy and I am sad and I'm feeling adrift. And wait, I'm feeling stuck because I am stuck in a feedback loop within my echo chamber. So hence, you have to broaden your perspective. One way to do that is obviously bouncing it off someone else. A lot of people are often apprehensive of that, and I understand, because they often don't want to share too many personal things with families or friends for the fear of judgment. I'm just going to say, this is where you can step into therapy, because this is where you can work on things in a space that is curated and designed for you and no one else. And it never leaves that room, and you don't have to feel shameful and you don't have to feel guilt. So people misunderstand what the purpose of therapy actually is. You don't always come because you're down and depressed or you're schizophrenic. You claim a space that is meant for you to be able to work on you unapologetically and no excuses and no exception for others. And that's what people often miss about therapy. So if you're trying to figure out how to escape your echo chamber, you might want to decide to try out some therapy. And by the way, many of you might have an employee assistance program where you can actually get some free therapy. Like sometimes it's 5 or 6 sessions that cost you nothing, that you can talk to someone. Go that route. I'd rather have you start bouncing what you're struggling with off someone than no one. And by the way, those EAP programs often have financial literacy, everything. If you struggle with addiction, they often offer a host of things when you are feeling stuck to help you to break the cycle that you're in. All right. So getting out that echo chamber. I said, there's 5 things you can do when you're struggling with this. The next thing, and this might be one of the most important thing, people, love should be a compass and not a cage. And that might be something that makes you go, wow, what do you mean by that, M.A.Y.A? When I say love should be a compass and not a cage, If you are doing more for others in a relationship and you're not loving you and you're not feeling the love back, ask yourself, is that really the direction you're trying to move in? Because the correct love you should be in should be a compass that points you towards happiness, support, maybe even some challenges. If you're growing and a person challenges you, like, hey, you want to do this, consider this. The compass should point towards where you want to go versus where you're not trying to go. And if you have no movement and you feel trapped, then the situations you are in are more like a cage versus the compass that you need them to be. So that means you have to learn how to shift. And that means putting in the front of your mind that you're not committing to or loving another person or a situation more than you love or respect yourself. And if you're in situations that require you to mute or bury yourself, you need to question if that's a place you really should be. And is it worth what you're sacrificing? Because if the love you have for them, or if the commitment you have to a situation is preventing you from being whole, then it becomes a weight and not a bond that you should make. So, learning how to shift when you read that room and see this is not pointing me in the direction I want to see in front of me. In fact, it's making me stagnant, or I'm not moving in the direction I want to go. It's now disrupted the actual true north of my compass. And people can and distract you from your true north if you are not careful, especially if you don't know what your true emotional and mental north is. So, learning how to shift becomes extremely important. And the fifth thing that you can work on, once you identify that you are struggling with some form of emotional paralysis, how to address it is take the smallest and most possible steps you can to get you where you need to be. I said this earlier. Change should be incremental, and people tend to fail at it when they try to take big, sweeping motions or big steps, and they're too much for them to make. There's a reason why to go from one floor to another floor, you often have to go maybe 10 to 12 steps because you can't do it in one big sweeping move. Making change in your life is often the same way. Each step takes you higher and moves you closer to where you want to be. But each step should be a plan and how you're going to get there. So we're going to call taking this particular step and say you have to learn that there's micro actions that you take. You just commit to one day at a time, prioritizing the things that you need to do that's going to help you to find and own that peace that you are seeking, that comfort that you want in your life. And when you start to feel the peace and the comfort from the small changes that you make, guess what? That action creates the momentum you often need to move forward. But people get highly frustrated. They take one step and then, okay, it's not the full outcome they want, but you know what the goal is. So you know step 2 is required. You must be diligent, but look at it as an incremental thing that you do. It's a micro process that can get you to stepping out of, let's say, that echo chamber, more importantly, breaking out of your emotional paralysis. Those are the 5 things that if you consider doing those things as you are trying to move forward and break free of emotional paralysis, you first have to be willing to actually identify that you are there first and foremost, and then be willing to address it and take action. And those are the 5 things that we talked about. So everybody, here's the thing I want you to think about as we wrap this up. The truth is hard about emotional paralysis, what it means. But I want you to think about you're avoiding pain and not moving forward by not taking action when you're paralyzed in situations. But if you look closer, you will see that maybe the despair or the feeling of sadness that's holding you back, when you decide to stay still, you aren't avoiding the pain. You're just opting a slow and agonizing burn until you run out of everything you have, versus learning how to take a clean break and to move towards your emotional freedom. By not addressing your emotional paralysis, you're choosing a pain that can rob you of your self-esteem, and that pain is avoiding you from healing. It's a lot to think about, but it's something we have to learn, because often relationships with family and friends, those people we hold the closest, those are the ones that can paralyze you the most. And to be honest, you learned a lot of that paralysis in childhood, but as an adult, you get to break the cycle. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning into the show. As I said, I always appreciate you listening. The whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambition and to help you harness that motivation that you seek in your everyday life so that you can get that satisfaction that you're looking for. Remember, you can find my episodes in so many places. As I said before earlier, you can find episodes pretty much on every podcast platform, whether it's Amazon, Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, there's there. Obviously, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can find all my episodes there. There's more than 90. You just search Maya Speaks to You. By the way, that's also how you can find me on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and X, Maya Speaks to You. But of course, I always tell people, I make this easy in more than one way. I do have a website, so you can always find my podcast. By the way, I do have 2 blogs that are there. I have my Me on Pause, my AKA menopause blog. So if you're struggling and going through that menopausal transition, I've got some nuggets that you definitely need to hear about. So check that out. That's there, as well as I do have my Maya Mindset post about weekly. I give you a thought. If you're trying to shift the way you think, it's not a easy thing to do. It's a mindset and it's a daily thing. And I give you something to process to help you to begin to shift your mindset towards what you want it to be. And those are things that you can also find on the website. And of course, everybody I did talk about, you can always find the Maya app. Pretty much, it's now also in the Google Play Store, which is nice. So you can find it now in the Apple Store. You can also find it in the Amazon Store. And you can scan these QR codes. All you have to do is search the Maya Experience, and voila, you will find all episodes of Maya there. So like I said, I'm trying to make this simple, easy for you to stay on top of your mental wellness. And again, this app cost you absolutely nothing. So go for that. Free, and you can work on your mental health. All right, everybody, until next time, as you know, I always say, your future becomes your past and your present is no more. So live every day to the fullest. Until next time, everyone, stay amazing, stay safe, but more importantly, stay genuine, because you are you and you shouldn't feel like you have to change that for anyone. Ciao until next time.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.